The bass pulsed through the floorboards, vibrating up my tired legs as I slid the thin straps of my heels around my ankles. Every night, the same ritual, the same knot in my stomach, the same prayer that tonight's tips would be enough. 5 minutes, Lily, Margot called through the thin door of the cramped dressing room, her voice raspy from years of cigarettes and late nights. Coming, I answered, my voice steadier than I felt. The mirror before me reflected a woman I barely recognized anymore. Glitter dusted across collarbones, too prominent after months of skipping meals so my daughter could eat. Dark circles beneath eyes I'd rimmed with liner to look sultry, rather than exhausted. My fingers trembled slightly as I applied another coat of lip gloss, the sticky sweetness of artificial cherry filling my nostrils. My phone buzzed on the makeup counter. Mrs. Patel, my elderly neighbor who watched Zoe when I worked nights. She's sleeping now. Fever's down. Don't worry. I closed my eyes, feeling the momentary relief wash over me. 3 nights of barely any sleep, holding my 10-month-old as she burned with fever, crying in pain from an ear infection we couldn't afford the medicine for until my last shift's tips came through. The prescription had nearly emptied my wallet again, leaving barely enough for formula to last the week. The club's smoke and cheap perfume clung to my skin, no matter how much I scrubbed in our apartment's temperamental shower. I'd come to think of it as the scent of desperation, sweet and acrid all at once, like overripe fruit beginning to rot. I tucked my phone away and stood, adjusting the sparkly lingerie that revealed far more than it concealed. Once, I would have died of embarrassment. Now, it was just fabric, just a means to an end. Dance. Smile, collect tips, buy formula, repeat. The narrow hallway led to the side of the stage, where shadows concealed the worst of the club's grime. The Velvet Slipper was hardly the high-end establishment the name suggested, just another dive on the wrong side of town, where men came to drink away their problems while creating new ones for women like me. Big crowd tonight, Margot murmured, passing me a shot of something clear and burning. Some VIPs in the back room. Management says give them special attention. She winked. The gesture somehow both motherly and sad coming from a woman who'd been doing this job since before I was born. I tossed back the alcohol, welcoming the momentary burn. VIPs at the Slipper? What? Did someone famous run out of gas in the neighborhood? My attempt at humor fell flat, edged with the bitterness I couldn't quite keep contained anymore. Not famous. Dangerous. Margot's voice dropped. Boss is here, the real one, not just the manager. Never seen the owner before, I said absently, adjusting my top. In the 6 months I'd been dancing here, I'd only ever dealt with Tony, the floor manager whose hands wandered too much, and whose breath always smelled of cheap bourbon. Keep it that way, honey, she said, suddenly serious. Men like him don't notice girls like us unless we make trouble, and trust me, you don't want that kind of attention. The DJ's voice boomed through the speakers, announcing my stage name, and I had no time to ask what she meant. The familiar music started, the song I'd selected months ago, because I could move to it without thinking, allowing my mind to drift far away from this place, these men, this life. I stepped onto the stage, momentarily blind in the harsh spotlight. The crowd was indeed larger than usual for a Wednesday night. Through the haze of cigarette smoke and colored lights, I began my routine, my body moving on autopilot, while my thoughts circled around the same worn track they always did, the calculations of rent due, formula needed, electricity bills marked final notice. The faces in the darkness blurred together as I danced, until suddenly, something shifted in the atmosphere. Like a current of cold air cutting through the stuffy heat of the club, I felt rather than saw a presence enter the room. The energy changed. Conversations halted. Even the bartenders moved with increased efficiency. That's when I saw him. He sat in the darkest corner of the VIP section, partially obscured by what I could only describe as henchmen, large men in expensive suits, who didn't quite fit in the seedy surroundings. But it was the man between them who drew my eye like a magnet. Even seated, I could tell he was tall. His suit wasn't off the rack like the others that came through these doors, but something tailored to fit broad shoulders and a lean frame. Dark hair, styled with precision. Strong jaw, clean-shaven, but it was his eyes that made me miss a beat in my routine. Dark, intent, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Not lust, not amusement, something calculating. I forced myself to look away, to continue my dance as though I hadn't noticed him. But I felt his gaze tracking my every move, raising goosebumps along my skin despite the heat. When my set ended, I collected the scattered bills from the stage, careful to maintain my smile until I was safely in the shadows again. Margot appeared at my elbow, her expression tense. "They want you for a private dance," she whispered, nodding toward the VIP section. My stomach dropped. "I don't do private rooms, Margot, you know that." It was my one rule, the line I'd promised myself I wouldn't cross no matter how desperate things got. "It's not a request, Lily," she squeezed my arm. "Tony says either you go or you're fired, and they're offering $500 for 15 minutes. The number hit me like a physical blow. $500, 2 months of formula, the overdue electric bill, maybe even enough left to finally take Zoe to a proper doctor instead of the free clinic with its endless waits. "Just dancing?" I asked, my voice small. Margot nodded. "Boss doesn't let that kind of thing happen here. Whatever else he is, he keeps it clean that way." 15 minutes. I could do anything for 15 minutes. I followed Margot through the crowd, acutely aware of the eyes following our progress. The VIP section was cordoned off with velvet ropes that had seen better days, guarded by a mountain of a man who moved aside without a word. Up close, the man was even more intimidating. He didn't look at me directly as I approached, instead finishing some conversation with one of his associates in a language I didn't recognize. Something Eastern European, the consonants hard and sharp. When he finally turned his attention to me, I felt pinned in place. "Sir," Margot said, her usual confidence subdued. "This is Lily." "Thank you," he replied, his accent present but subtle, his voice deeper than I'd expected. "That will be all." Margot squeezed my hand once before disappearing, leaving me standing before this stranger who radiated power like a physical force. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the space beside him. I perched on the edge of the leather couch, hyper-aware of the distance between us, which felt simultaneously too much and not enough. "Your name is not Lily," he stated. "Not a question?" I blinked, thrown off guard. "It's my work name." "And your real name? Does it matter?" I countered, then immediately regretted my boldness. But instead of anger, I saw the faintest trace of amusement in his expression. "I prefer honesty in all transactions." "Eleanor," I said after a moment. "My name is Eleanor." He nodded as if confirming something to himself. "Eleanor. I am Alexander." No last name offered, but somehow I knew that was deliberate. "You are new here." 6 months, I corrected. "New," he repeated, with the certainty of someone who was never contradicted. "And you dance well, but without joy, like a prisoner performing a task." His observation, so unexpected and accurate, left me momentarily speechless. The other men at the table were carefully looking elsewhere, as if afraid to witness this conversation. "I'm here to dance for you," I said finally, desperate to regain some control of the situation. "Did you want music, or—" "Why do you dance, Eleanor?" he interrupted, his gaze intent on my face. I stared back at him, bewildered by the question and increasingly certain that this wasn't a normal private dance arrangement. "For money. Why else? Many women choose easier paths to money than this." His gesture encompassed the club, the stages, the men. "I don't have many choices," I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "Everyone has choices," he countered. "You have chosen this one." I want to know why. Some reckless impulse made me reach for my phone, pulling up the photo I kept on my home screen. Zoe, smiling up at the camera, her few baby teeth visible, her eyes crinkling with delight. I turned the screen toward him. "This is why," I said. "Her formula costs more than I used to make in a week at the diner. The antibiotics for her ear infections cost more than our rent. I have choices, sure. I choose for her to eat. I choose for her to have medicine. I choose for her to have a roof over her head." I expected him to dismiss my answer, to become impatient with my lack of cooperation. Instead, he took the phone from my hand, studying the image with an intensity that made me nervous. "Her father?" he asked, still looking at the photo. Not in the picture, I said flatly, the familiar anger flaring. Left when he found out I was pregnant. Cleaned out our account on his way out. Alexander handed back the phone, his expression darkening. Men who abandon their children deserve a special kind of punishment. Something in his tone sent a chill down my spine, like he wasn't speaking theoretically. I tucked the phone away, increasingly confused by this encounter. I don't understand what you want from me, I admitted. A conversation. For now. He leaned back slightly. You work hard, Eleanor. Dancing here. Caring for your daughter. Alone. It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. How much does this place pay you? I shifted uncomfortably. Depends on the night. Tips mostly. Not enough, he stated. Not for what it costs you. I didn't know how to respond to that. He was right. But what did it matter? It wasn't like I had better options waiting. Alexander reached inside his jacket and I tensed instinctively, but he withdrew only a business card, plain white with a phone number embossed in black. No name. No company. I have a proposition for you, he said, holding out the card. My heart rate accelerated. I'd heard stories from other dancers about propositions from wealthy men. Despite Margot's assurances, I prepared to leave, to risk losing this job rather than agree to whatever he was suggesting. Not what you're thinking, Alexander added, reading my expression. I need someone to manage a property of mine. An apartment building. The current manager is unsatisfactory. The position includes an apartment in the building, 2 bedrooms, secure entry, good neighborhood. I stared at him, certain this was some kind of elaborate joke. You want me to manage a building? I don't have any experience with that. You have experience surviving. That requires more intelligence and determination than managing rent payments and maintenance calls. He continued to hold out the card. The salary is 3 times what you make here. More with bonuses for full occupancy. Why would you offer this to me? I asked, suspicious of kindness that seemed too good to be true. Nothing in my life had prepared me to trust sudden generosity, especially from a man like him. I have my reasons, he replied, offering nothing more. Take the card. Call tomorrow if you're interested. Or don't. He shrugged. The choice, as always, is yours. I hesitated, then took the card, the thick paper expensive between my fingers. Our 15 minutes are nearly up, he said, checking a watch that probably cost more than my yearly income. You should return to work before your manager becomes suspicious. I stood, still clutching the card, feeling as though I'd entered some alternate reality where dangerous-looking men offered life-changing jobs to desperate single mothers. Thank you for the dance, Eleanor, Alexander said, though I hadn't danced at all. As I turned to leave, one of his men pressed an envelope into my hand. I opened it later in the dressing room to find not $500, but $2,000 in crisp $100 bills, and underneath the money, a note in elegant handwriting for the medicine your daughter needs. I sat heavily on the rickety stool before the mirror, staring at the envelope, the money, the card with its single phone number. My hands were shaking. How did he know about her medicine? I had mentioned antibiotics, but not that I couldn't afford the full course the doctor had prescribed, settling instead for the 3-day supply that the free clinic could provide. Outside, the music thumped on, calling me back to the stage, to the life I'd been living. But the card in my hand whispered of something else. An opportunity or a trap. I couldn't be sure which. What I didn't know then, as I carefully tucked both the money and the card into my bag, was that Alexander Volkov didn't just own the building he wanted me to manage. He owned the velvet slipper. He owned the block it sat on. And in the coming days, I would discover that he intended to own me as well. Not as a possession to be discarded, but as something infinitely more dangerous. A woman to be protected at all costs. A woman who had accidentally caught the eye of the most powerful man in the city. A man whose enemies were about to become mine. Block 2. I didn't call the number the next day, or the day after. Instead, I used the money to buy the full course of antibiotics for Zoe, to stock up on formula, diapers, and to pay 2 months of rent in advance. For the first time since her birth, I felt like I could breathe, if only for a moment. Mrs. Patel noticed the change immediately. "Your eyes have light today," she said, as she rocked Zoe gently in our tiny kitchen while I prepared her bottle. "Good night at work?" I hesitated, unsure how to explain. "Something like that. You're too young to look so tired all the time," she continued, her accent thickening as it always did when she spoke from the heart. "Pretty girl like you should be smiling more." Zoe gurgled happily, reaching for the old woman's glasses, her fever gone, her ear infection clearing. The relief of seeing my daughter healthy again overshadowed my lingering unease about Alexander's offer. "Someone offered me a different job," I admitted, testing the words aloud. "Better pay, better hours." Mrs. Patel's eyes lit up. "You take it. What job?" "Managing an apartment building, but—" I shook my head. "It feels too good to be true. And the man who offered it— man? Her expression grew knowing in a way that made me blush. "Handsome man?" Despite everything, I laughed. "That's not the point, Mrs. Patel." "Always the point, Beta," she replied, using the affectionate Hindi term she'd called me since I moved in. "Handsome man with good job offer. What is problem?" The problem was that every instinct told me Alexander was dangerous. The way the club had shifted when he entered. The deference of his men. The casual display of wealth. The inexplicable knowledge of my situation. But as the days passed and I returned to my exhausting routine, dancing at night, caring for Zoe during the day, counting pennies and cutting corners, the card in my wallet seemed to grow heavier, more insistent. A week after our meeting, I found myself staring at my phone at 2 a.m., Zoe finally asleep in her crib beside my bed, the business card balanced on my knee. Before I could second-guess myself, I dialed the number, not expecting anyone to answer at this hour. He picked up on the second ring. "Eleanor." His voice betrayed no surprise, as though he'd been waiting for my call. "How did you know it was me?" I asked, thrown off balance immediately. "I don't give this number to many people," he replied simply. Then, "You've taken some time to consider my offer." "I needed to think," I said. "And now," I took a deep breath, "I want to know why. Why me? Why this job? What's the catch?" The line was silent for a moment, just the faint sound of what might have been ice clinking in a glass. "No catch," he finally said. "I need someone trustworthy, someone who understands the value of having a safe home. The previous manager was stealing from tenants, making them pay for repairs he never completed." "And you think I'm trustworthy because—" "You dance to feed your daughter, not for yourself. Your eyes watch the exits, not the men. You're careful, observant." A pause. "And I'm rarely wrong about people." The way he spoke, with such certainty about me based on a single meeting, should have been unsettling. Instead, I felt an odd warmth at being seen, truly seen. For the first time in so long. "I don't know anything about managing a building," I admitted. "The basics are simple. Collect rent. Address maintenance concerns. Keep the property secure." Something shifted in his tone, becoming more businesslike. "The salary is $4,000 monthly. The apartment is included. 2 bedrooms, fully furnished if you need it to be. Health insurance for you and your daughter after a 30-day probationary period." My breath caught. Health insurance. The words felt mythical, a luxury I'd stopped allowing myself to even hope for. "What's the address?" I asked, my resistance crumbling. He named a neighborhood I recognized. Not the wealthiest part of the city, but respectable, safe, with good schools nearby, the kind of place I'd dreamed of raising Zoe. "When would I start?" "Tomorrow, if you're available. I can have someone pick you up at noon to show you the property." It was happening too fast, leaving no time for doubt. Perhaps that was intentional on his part. "All right," I agreed, my heartbeat quickening. "Tomorrow at noon." Good. The satisfaction in that single word was unmistakable. "Pack whatever you'll need for a few days. You can move your remaining belongings over the weekend." "I haven't agreed to take the job yet," I protested. "I want to see the building first." His low chuckle surprised me. "Of course. Until tomorrow, Eleanor." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone, wondering if I'd just made a terrible mistake or taken the first step toward salvation. Precisely at noon, a sleek black car with tinted windows pulled up outside my rundown apartment building. The driver, A solid man in a dark suit who introduced himself only as Stefan helped load my suitcase and Zoe's portable crib into the trunk. Mrs. Patel watched from her window, giving me an enthusiastic thumbs up as I secured Zoe's car seat, which looked absurdly out of place in the luxury vehicle. "Mr. Volkov mentioned you have a child," Stefan said, the first confirmation I'd received of Alexander's last name. He had this installed this morning. He gestured to the car seat base that perfectly fit Zoe's carrier. The thoughtfulness of this gesture caught me off guard. Throughout the drive across town, I found myself watching the city transform outside the windows, from crumbling buildings and payday loan shops to tree-lined streets and renovated brownstones. The apartment building, when we arrived, was a handsome 6-story brick structure with large windows and small balconies. Nothing ostentatious, but solid, well-maintained. The kind of place where people built stable lives. "Mr. Volkov is waiting inside," Stefan informed me, helping with my bags. Sure enough, Alexander stood in the lobby, looking somehow both out of place and perfectly at home in his immaculate suit. His eyes moved from me to Zoe, asleep in her carrier, lingering there with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Welcome, Eleanor," he said, then nodded to Stefan, who disappeared with my bags. "You didn't mention you'd be here," I said, adjusting my grip on Zoe's carrier. "I prefer to handle important matters personally." He gestured toward the elevator. "Shall we?" The building was even more impressive inside. Clean hallways, fresh paint, good lighting. As Alexander gave me a tour, explaining the responsibilities of the position, I struggled to find the catch, the hidden drawback that would make this opportunity less miraculous than it appeared. "The manager's apartment is on the 2nd floor," he explained, unlocking a door at the end of a hallway. "I thought you might prefer being closer to the ground level with a small child." The apartment that awaited us was nothing short of perfect. Spacious rooms with hardwood floors, a kitchen with new appliances, windows that filled the space with natural light, and, most surprisingly, furniture that looked new but arranged in a way that already made the place feel like a home. "Is this what you meant by fully furnished?" I asked, unable to keep the awe from my voice as I set Zoe's carrier down on a plush area rug. "Is it acceptable?" There was a trace of uncertainty in his question that seemed at odds with his commanding presence. "It's incredible," I admitted, "but this feels like a lot more than a manager's apartment." Alexander moved to the kitchen, opening the refrigerator to reveal it fully stocked with groceries. The previous manager left the place in poor condition. It needed to be redone completely. I saw no reason not to make it comfortable. I ran my hand along the counter, noting the high-quality materials, the attention to detail. "And the furniture? The groceries?" "Convenience." He shrugged, but something in his expression suggested there was more to it. "I assumed you wouldn't have time to shop immediately with your daughter to care for." Zoe chose that moment to wake, her small cries filling the apartment. I quickly moved to lift her from the carrier, cradling her against my chest as her eyes opened, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. For the first time since meeting him, I saw Alexander look genuinely disarmed. His usual mask of control slipped as he watched Zoe, revealing something almost like longing. "She's bigger than in the photo," he said softly. "Babies grow fast," I replied, rocking Zoe gently as she settled against me. "She'll be walking before I know it." He nodded, then seemed to recollect himself, returning to business. "Your duties would start Monday. Rent is collected on the 1st of each month. There are 24 units. Currently 22 occupied. Maintenance requests go through an app that will be installed on the phone provided with the position." As he continued explaining the details, I tried to reconcile this efficient, professional man with the one who had watched my daughter with such wistful eyes moments before. There were layers to Alexander Volkov that I couldn't begin to understand, and something told me that was by design. "Do you own many buildings like this?" I asked when he finished. A smile flickered across his face. "A few, among other investments." "And the club? The Velvet Slipper? Is that one of your investments too?" His expression revealed nothing. "You've done your research." "Actually, no," I admitted. "Just a guess. The way everyone reacted when you came in that night. The way Tony practically turned green when he saw you." "Tony?" Alexander's voice hardened. "I wasn't aware you had interactions with him." He's the floor manager. All the dancers deal with him. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. Has he ever been inappropriate with you, Eleanor? The question carried weight beyond simple concern. I chose my words carefully. He's inappropriate with everyone. It's part of working there. Not anymore, Alexander stated, with a finality that made me wonder what exactly he meant. If you accept this position, you won't be returning to the slipper. The implied condition hung in the air between us. Is that a requirement of the job, that I quit dancing? It would be inadvisable for my building manager to work in one of my other establishments, particularly that one. So he did own the club. The confirmation should have surprised me more than it did. I need to know what I'm getting into, I said, meeting his gaze directly. What exactly do you do, Mr. Volkov? Alexander, he corrected. And I'm a businessman. Import-export primarily. Real estate. Some entertainment venues. The vague answer told me everything and nothing. What kind of businessman inspired the fear I'd seen in people's eyes at the club? What kind of businessman carried the subtle threat of violence in his very presence? I knew the answer, even if I wasn't ready to acknowledge it aloud. And this job offer? I pressed. Is it really just because you need a trustworthy manager? He studied me for a long moment, as if deciding how much truth to offer. Let's say I recognize potential when I see it, and I prefer to nurture what interests me. The implications of his words sent a shiver down my spine that wasn't entirely unpleasant. Zoe squirmed in my arms, breaking the tension of the moment. I should feed her, I said. Alexander nodded, moving toward the door. Take the weekend to settle in. Stefan will bring the rest of your belongings tomorrow. If you need anything at all, call the number I gave you. I haven't said yes yet, I pointed out. He paused at the doorway, that ghost of a smile appearing again. Haven't you? As the door closed behind him, I stood in the center of the beautiful apartment that could be mine, our home, trying to ignore the voice in my head, warning that nothing came without a price. What I didn't yet understand was just how high that price might be. By Monday morning, it felt as if we had always lived in the apartment. Zoe seemed to bloom in the new space, crawling enthusiastically across the clean floors, babbling happily in rooms filled with natural light. The weight that had pressed on my chest for months, the constant grinding anxiety of poverty, had eased enough to let me breathe. I still didn't fully trust this sudden change in fortune, but I couldn't deny the transformation in our lives. For the first time since becoming a mother, I didn't have to choose between buying diapers or paying the electric bill. As instructed, I reported to the small office on the building's first floor at 9. A middle-aged woman with steel-gray hair waited for me, introducing herself as Irina. Mr. Volkov asked me to show you the systems, she explained, her accent similar to Alexander's but heavier. I manage his other buildings. You call me if you have questions, yes? For the next several hours, Irina walked me through the property management software, maintenance procedures, and tenant files. The work seemed straightforward enough, certainly less demeaning than dancing for tips from drunken men. The tenants, they are good people, Irina told me as she prepared to leave. Working families mostly. Some students, no troublemakers. She fixed me with a serious look. Mr. Volkov does not allow trouble in his buildings. Something in her tone suggested this rule was enforced by more than just eviction notices. How long have you worked for him? I asked, curiosity getting the better of me. Many years, since he first came to this country. Her expression softened slightly. He is a good employer if you are loyal. Generous. Before I could ask more, the office phone rang. Irina nodded for me to answer it. Valley Terrace, this is Eleanor, I said, trying to sound professional. Eleanor, how are you settling in? Alexander's deep voice was instantly recognizable. Well, thank you. Irina has been very helpful. Good. I'll be stopping by this evening to check on things, around 7. It wasn't a request, but I found myself agreeing anyway. 7 is fine. After hanging up, I caught Irina watching me with an unreadable expression. Mr. Volkov doesn't usually visit the properties himself, she said carefully. He has people for that. The implication hung in the air, but I chose to ignore it. I'm sure he just wants to make sure the new manager isn't going to burn the place down on day 1. Irina didn't smile. Be careful, Eleanor. Mr. Volkov is She seemed to search for the right word. Intense, when he takes an interest in something. Or someone. Her warning stayed with me throughout the day, as I familiarized myself with the building, meeting several tenants who seemed pleasantly surprised by my age and approachability. Apparently, the previous manager had been a surly older man who rarely fixed anything without multiple complaints. By 6:30, I'd fed and bathed Zoe, and was trying to decide what to wear for Alexander's visit, a decision that shouldn't have mattered, but somehow did. I settled on jeans and a simple blouse, my first time wearing regular clothes to meet him instead of the revealing outfits from the club. At precisely 7 o'clock, a knock came at my door. Zoe was playing on a blanket in the living room, surrounded by the few toys we'd accumulated, now joined by several new ones that had mysteriously appeared in the apartment along with the furniture. I opened the door to find Alexander alone, no bodyguards visible for the first time since I'd met him. He'd exchanged his suit for dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that somehow looked just as expensive, just as impeccably tailored. Eleanor. He nodded in greeting, his eyes moving past me to where Zoe played. Please come in, I offered, stepping aside. He entered with a subtle scan of the space that I was beginning to recognize. Assessing exits, checking for threats, a habit so ingrained he probably didn't realize he was doing it. Everything is satisfactory? He asked, though his attention remained on Zoe, who had noticed our visitor and was staring at him with open curiosity. More than satisfactory, I admitted. It's perfect. Thank you. He moved toward Zoe slowly, as if approaching a wild animal he didn't want to startle. To my surprise, my normally shy daughter showed no fear. She lifted her arms in the universal gesture, asking to be picked up. Alexander looked at me, silently requesting permission. It's okay, I said, though something about the image of this dangerous man holding my daughter created an odd tightness in my chest. With unexpected gentleness, he lifted Zoe, holding her with the confidence of someone who had done this before. She immediately reached for his face, fascinated by this new person. Hello, little one, he said softly, his accent more pronounced with the gentle words. She likes you, I observed, genuinely surprised. She's usually wary of strangers. Children are excellent judges of character, he replied, the corner of his mouth lifting in what might have been his first genuine smile in my presence. They sense things adults have learned to ignore. And what does she sense about you? I asked boldly. His eyes met mine over Zoe's head. Perhaps that I would never allow any harm to come to her, or to her mother. The intensity of his gaze made me look away first. Would you like something to drink? I'm afraid I don't have anything fancy, but there's coffee, tea. Tea would be fine. While I prepared it, Alexander continued holding Zoe, speaking to her quietly in what I guessed was Russian. My daughter responded with delighted babbling, completely at ease in his arms. You're good with her, I said, setting a mug of tea on the coffee table. Do you have children? A shadow passed over his face. No, the single word carried enough weight to discourage further questions on that topic. I sat across from him, watching as Zoe played with the expensive watch on his wrist. How was your first day? He asked, skillfully redirecting the conversation. Good. Everyone's been helpful. The tenants seem nice. I hesitated, then added, though they all look slightly terrified when I mentioned the building owner. Instead of being offended, he seemed amused. Fear can be useful. It encourages people to fulfill their obligations promptly. Is that why you cultivate it? The fear? Alexander studied me for a long moment. You're not afraid of me. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Should I be? Most people are, with good reason. He gently disentangled his watch from Zoe's curious fingers. But no, I don't want your fear, Eleanor. What do you want then? The question had been building since our first encounter, and I couldn't hold it back any longer. Before he could answer, Zoe yawned widely, her eyelids growing heavy. Alexander noticed immediately. She's tired, he observed, standing smoothly with my daughter still in his arms. Where does she sleep? I led him to the second bedroom, which had been transformed into a perfect nursery, complete with a crib far nicer than the second-hand one we'd left behind. He laid Zoe down with surprising care, his large hands gentle as he arranged her blanket. You've done well with her, he said quietly as we stepped back into the hallway. despite difficult circumstances. She's everything to me, I replied simply. Back in the living room, Alexander reclaimed his seat, his posture relaxed, but his eyes watchful as always. You asked what I want, he said, returning to my earlier question. I want what most men want, to build something lasting, to protect what's mine. And this building is yours, I said carefully, among other things. He took a sip of his tea. Tell me, Eleanor, why did you agree to take this job? The sudden reversal caught me off guard. Because it was an opportunity I couldn't pass up, a chance to give Zoe a better life. Not because of the man offering it, heat crept into my face. I barely know you, yet you trusted me enough to move into this apartment, to bring your daughter here. His eyes held mine. Why? I considered lying, offering some safe answer, but something told me he would see through it immediately. Because when you look at me, you actually see me, I admitted. Not just a body on stage, not just a single mother struggling to get by. You see something else. I see everything, he confirmed, his voice lowering. Your strength, your determination, the fierce love you have for your child. He leaned forward slightly. And I see the woman you could become if you weren't constantly fighting just to survive. His words resonated with something deep inside me, a part of myself I'd nearly forgotten existed during the brutal months since Zoe's father had abandoned us. Before exhaustion and desperation had hollowed me out. Why does that matter to you? I asked, barely above a whisper. Because rare things should be treasured, he answered, with a simplicity that belied the weight of his words. Nurtured. Protected. The air between us seemed to thicken, charged with something I wasn't ready to name. Alexander broke the tension first, standing abruptly. It's getting late. I should go. I walked him to the door, suddenly reluctant to see him leave despite my lingering wariness. If you need anything, he began. I'll call, I finished for him. He nodded, hesitating at the threshold. There will be a car waiting for you tomorrow morning if you wish to retrieve anything else from your old apartment. Thank you, I said, though I had no intention of returning to that place of bad memories. He reached out then, his hand brushing a strand of hair from my face, with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the power I knew those hands contained. Good night, Eleanor. Long after he left, I could still feel the ghost of his touch on my skin. The next few weeks settled into an unexpected rhythm. Managing the building was straightforward work, and for the first time since Zoe's birth, I had regular hours, a stable income, and the luxury of actually being present for my daughter's daily milestones. I saw Alexander only occasionally, brief visits that were ostensibly about building matters, but always seemed to end with him spending time with Zoe, who had developed an inexplicable attachment to him. Each time, the air between us grew heavier with unspoken tension, with possibilities neither of us acknowledged aloud. It was during this lull of normality that the past I'd been trying to outrun finally caught up with me. I was in the small park across from the building, pushing Zoe on the infant swing, when a familiar voice froze me in place. Well, look who it is. Playing mommy in the sunshine now, huh? I turned to find Tony, the floor manager from the Velvet Slipper, leaning against a nearby tree. His usual sleazy smile was gone, replaced by something harder, angrier. What are you doing here, Tony? I asked, instinctively moving to stand between him and Zoe. Funny thing happened after you disappeared, he said, taking a step closer. Boss came in, fired me on the spot. No explanation, no warning, just threw me out like garbage. My pulse quickened. That has nothing to do with me, he laughed, the sound sharp and ugly. Bullshit. You spend 15 minutes in VIP with him and suddenly you're gone and I'm out on my ass? I'm not stupid, Eleanor. I don't know what you're talking about, I insisted, reaching to lift Zoe from the swing. I need to get back to work. Tony's hand shot out, gripping my arm. Not so fast. I want to know what you told him about me. Let go of me, I said, keeping my voice level despite the fear crawling up my spine. You think you're special? You're just his latest toy. Tony's fingers dug deeper. He'll get bored, just like all the others. And then where will you be? Back to taking your clothes off for dollar bills? Before I could respond, a shadow fell over us. Stefan, Alexander's driver, stood there, his expression murderous as he took in Tony's hand on my arm. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. Tony released me immediately, taking a step back. "Just catching up with an old friend," he said, his bravado faltering. "Ms. Eleanor, Mr. Volkov is waiting for you and the little one," Stefan said, not acknowledging Tony's words. "I'll escort you back to the building." The color drained from Tony's face at the mention of Alexander's name. "Volkov? You're with Volkov?" The genuine fear in his eyes confirmed what I had suspected, but tried to ignore. Whoever Alexander was, whatever he did, it was enough to terrify a man like Tony into retreat. "This isn't over," Tony muttered, before turning to walk quickly away. Stefan watched him go, then turned to me. "Are you all right, Ms. Eleanor?" "Yes," I said, although my racing heart suggested otherwise. "How did you know I was here, Mr. Volkov has asked that you and your daughter be looked after," he replied simply, "especially when you leave the building." The implication that I was being watched should have disturbed me. Instead, I felt a confusing mixture of relief and apprehension as I followed Stefan back to the apartment building, Zoe babbling happily in my arms, oblivious to what had just transpired. What exactly had I gotten myself into? And more importantly, was there any way out if I wanted one? I didn't tell Alexander about Tony's appearance at the park. Something held me back, perhaps the fear that his reaction would confirm exactly what kind of man he was. Instead, I threw myself into my new role, determined to prove that his faith in me wasn't misplaced. The building ran smoothly under my management. Tenants began stopping by the office not just with complaints, but with small talk, cookies, invitations to community events. For the first time in years, I felt like part of something, a community that didn't look at me with judgment or pity. 3 weeks after the park incident, I was reviewing maintenance requests when my office phone rang. "Valley Terrace, this is Eleanor. There's a problem." Alexander's voice was tight, controlled in a way that immediately put me on edge. "I'm sending Stefan to bring you and Zoe to my house. Now." "What? Why?" I clutched the phone tighter. "What's happening?" "I'll explain when you arrive. Pack enough for a few days. Stefan will be there in 15 minutes. He paused, then added, "Trust me, Eleanor." The line went dead before I could argue. Panic rose in my throat as I rushed upstairs to pack, mind racing through possibilities. Had I done something wrong? Was he tired of his charity case? Was this about Tony? True to his word, Stefan arrived precisely 15 minutes later, his usually stoic expression even more severe than normal. He helped me load our hastily packed bags into the car, secured Zoe's car seat, and drove us out of the city. "Where are we going?" I asked as urban landscapes gave way to increasingly affluent suburbs. "Mr. Volkov's private residence," Stefan answered, offering nothing more. After nearly an hour, we turned onto a private road that wound through dense woods before opening to reveal a sprawling modern house of stone and glass, perched on a hillside with views of the distant city skyline. A high wall surrounded the property, and I noticed cameras at strategic points along the approach. Stefan pulled up to the front entrance where Alexander stood waiting, his posture rigid with tension I hadn't seen before. He opened my door himself, taking Zoe from my arms the moment we stepped out. "Are you both all right?" he asked, his eyes scanning us as if checking for injuries. "We're fine," I assured him, increasingly confused. "Alexander, what's going on?" He nodded to Stefan, who disappeared with our bags, then guided me into the house with a hand at the small of my back. The interior was exactly what I'd expected. Minimalist, expensive, impeccably designed. But I was too anxious to appreciate it. "There was an incident at your old apartment building last night," Alexander finally explained, leading me into a spacious living room with floor-to-ceiling windows. "A fire." My breath caught. Was anyone hurt? 3 units were destroyed, 1 fatality. His jaw tightened. The apartment directly beneath your former unit. Cold dread washed over me as the implications sank in. "You think it was meant for me? For us?" Instead of answering directly, he crossed to a sleek console table and picked up a tablet, swiping to bring up what looked like security footage. "This was captured by a camera across the street from your building 2 days ago." He handed me the tablet, and I watched as Tony spoke with 2 men I didn't recognize in the alley beside my old apartment building. The conversation appeared heated, with Tony gesturing angrily while pointing up toward what would have been my window. "Tony," I whispered. "But why would he—" "Because he believes you're the reason he lost his position," Alexander said, his voice dangerously quiet. "And because he knows hurting you would hurt me." The admission hung in the air between us, more revealing than anything he'd said before. "The police?" I asked, setting the tablet down with shaking hands. "Are investigating. They believe it was an electrical fire." His tone made it clear he thought otherwise. "Regardless, until I'm certain there's no threat to you and Zoe, you'll stay here where I can protect you." The possessive edge to his words should have alarmed me. Instead, with Zoe gurgling happily in his arms, seemingly content in this strange place, I felt an odd sense of security. "For how long?" "As long as necessary." His expression softened slightly. "I have plenty of space. You'll be comfortable here." Before I could respond, a woman appeared in the doorway, middle-aged, with a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded me of Irina. "Ah, Marta," Alexander said. "This is Eleanor and Zoe. They will be staying with us for a while. Please show Eleanor to the East Wing guest suite." Marta nodded, gesturing for me to follow. As I moved to take Zoe from Alexander, he shook his head slightly. "I'll keep her with me for now, if that's all right. Let you settle in." At my hesitation, he added, "We'll be right here." Reluctantly, I followed Marta through the house, trying to absorb the scale of the place. The guest suite turned out to be larger than our entire apartment, with a connected room already prepared as a nursery. "You've worked for Mr. Volkov long?" I asked, as Marta efficiently unpacked my things. 10 years, she replied, "since he bought this property." "And has he had guests stay before?" I tried to keep my tone casual. Marta paused, giving me a measured look. "Not like you." She resumed her work, adding, "He had the nursery prepared last week. Ordered everything new." "Last week?" I repeated. "But how did he know we'd be coming?" "Mr. Volkov prefers to be prepared for all possibilities." She smoothed a hand over the bedspread. "Dinner is at 7. The closet has been stocked with additional clothing if you need it." With that cryptic statement, she left me alone in the luxurious suite, my mind reeling. Alexander had prepared for our arrival a week ago, long before the fire. Had he always intended to bring us here? Was the threat to our safety real, or a convenient excuse? When I returned to the living room, I found Alexander seated on the floor, watching as Zoe attempted to crawl toward a collection of new toys arranged on a plush rug. The sight was so domestic, so at odds with the dangerous man I knew him to be, that I stood frozen in the doorway. He sensed my presence immediately, looking up with an expression I couldn't quite read. "She's very determined," he observed, as Zoe focused intently on reaching a colorful stacking toy just beyond her grasp. "Yes," I agreed, moving into the room. "She gets that from me, clearly." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Are the accommodations acceptable?" "They're excessive," I said honestly. "Marta mentioned you had them prepared last week." If he was bothered by this revelation, he didn't show it. I like to anticipate needs before they arise, including the need to suddenly move us into your home. He helped Zoe reach the toy she'd been struggling toward before answering. "I had concerns about security at the apartment building. It seemed prudent to have an alternative ready." "Concerns that you didn't share with me," I pointed out, sinking onto the sofa. Alexander looked up at me, his expression serious. "I didn't want to frighten you unnecessarily, especially when you were just beginning to feel safe." The consideration behind that decision touched me, even as the implications unsettled me. "How long have you been worried about my safety?" "Since the day Tony approached you in the park." I stared at him, stunned. "You knew about that?" "Stefan reports to me, Eleanor, and the park has cameras." He stroked Zoe's head gently as she played. "I should have acted sooner. The fire might have been prevented. This isn't your fault," I said automatically. "It is." His voice hardened. "Your connection to me put you at risk. I should have anticipated Tony's resentment would lead to retaliation." "My connection to you," I repeated, testing the words. "What exactly is that connection, Alexander? You've given me a job, a home, protection, but I still don't understand why. What am I to you?" He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, lacking its usual control, almost vulnerable. From the moment I saw you on that stage, watching over the room instead of seeking attention, I recognized something in you that called to me. He kept his eyes on Zoe as he spoke. A strength beneath the vulnerability, a fierce protectiveness, a refusal to be broken by circumstances. He looked up then, his gaze intense. You remind me of my mother. Whatever I'd expected, it wasn't this. Your mother? She was like you, determined to protect her child at any cost, working multiple jobs after my father was killed, keeping us housed and fed through sheer will. Something dark flashed across his face. Until she couldn't anymore. The pain in his voice was raw, surprising me with its honesty. What happened to her? She trusted the wrong man, someone who offered help, protection. His hands clenched briefly. It was a lie. He wanted to use her connections to my father's former associates. When she refused to cooperate, he didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. I'm sorry, I whispered. I was 14, too young to protect her, but old enough to understand what happened. He looked directly at me, old enough to swear it would never happen again to anyone under my protection. The weight of his past, the explanation for his protective instincts, settled over me. It explained so much. His interest in Zoe and me, his immediate offer of help, the security measures. So I'm a charity case? Someone you're helping because you couldn't help your mother? I tried to keep the hurt from my voice. No. Alexander moved in one fluid motion from the floor to sit beside me on the sofa, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. You were never charity, Eleanor. You were a revelation. His hand reached for mine, enveloping it completely. I've built my life around power, control, security, necessary protections in my world. But watching you that first night, dancing not for yourself but for her. He nodded toward Zoe. I saw something I'd forgotten existed. Pure, selfless love. My heart thundered in my chest as he continued, his voice dropping lower. You made me want things I'd denied myself for years. A family. A woman who sees me as a man, not just what I can provide or the fear I can inspire. His thumb traced patterns on my palm. I know what people call me, what they believe me to be. Much of it is true. I won't pretend otherwise. A mafia boss, I said softly, finally speaking aloud what I'd suspected from the beginning. He inclined his head slightly, neither confirming nor denying. My world is dangerous, Eleanor. I've kept you at arm's length partly to protect you from it. But the fire proved that distance doesn't guarantee safety. So what now? I asked, acutely aware of his hand still holding mine, of Zoe playing contentedly on his floor, of the growing certainty that my life had irrevocably shifted course the moment I met this man. Now you stay here, where I can ensure your safety until the threat is eliminated. The clinical way he spoke those final words sent a chill through me, and after that, Alexander's eyes held mine. That depends on you, on what you want. What if what I want is the truth? All of it. He released my hand, leaning back slightly. Are you certain? Once you know everything, there's no going back. I thought of the comfortable life he'd given us, the security, the care he'd shown Zoe, balanced against the darkness I sensed beneath the surface, the danger that seemed to orbit him like gravity. I need to know who I've tied my life to, I said finally, who I'm trusting with my daughter's future. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. Then I'll tell you everything. After dinner. He glanced at his watch. For now, perhaps you'd like to rest, or explore the grounds. This place is as much yours as mine while you're here. The casual offer of sharing his domain felt significant somehow, a threshold being crossed. As I looked around the beautiful home, at Zoe happily playing, at the man beside me with his dangerous hands and wounded past, I wondered if I'd already made my choice long before this moment, and I wondered if, like his mother, I was trusting the wrong man, or if Alexander Volkov was exactly who I needed him to be. Dinner was a surprisingly domestic affair. Marta had prepared an impressive meal, served in a dining room with views of the sunset stretching across the skyline. Alexander had arranged for a high chair for Zoe, and watched with visible amusement as she enthusiastically smashed pieces of soft vegetables between her fingers. "She has your determination," he observed, his usual intensity softened by something like fondness. "And my stubbornness," I added, wiping pureed carrot from Zoe's chin. "Once she decides she wants something, there's no changing her mind. A valuable trait," he said, "when properly directed." The conversation flowed more easily than I expected, touching on the building, the tenants, books we'd both read, careful topics that kept us in safer waters. But beneath it all ran the current of anticipation, the knowledge that after dinner would come, the conversation that might change everything. When we finished eating, Alexander suggested I put Zoe to bed while he handled some business calls. I was grateful for the reprieve, for the chance to gather my thoughts while going through the familiar routine of bath time and bedtime stories. The nursery he'd prepared was perfect, a crib with a mobile of stars and moons, a sound machine that played gentle ocean waves, a rocking chair beside a window that looked out over gardens illuminated by subtle landscape lighting. As I rocked Zoe to sleep, I tried to reconcile the man who had thought of these tender details with the dangerous figure others clearly feared. Once Zoe was sleeping peacefully, I found myself drawn to explore the house. The east wing where our suite was located connected to the main living areas through a gallery lined with art, not the generic expensive pieces I might have expected, but works that showed genuine thought and taste. Landscapes of rugged coastlines, abstract pieces in deep blues and silvers, black and white photographs of city streets in what might have been Russia. I found Alexander in what appeared to be his study, a masculine space of dark wood and leather, one wall dominated by bookshelves, another by windows that now reflected the room back upon itself in the darkness. He stood at a drink cart, pouring amber liquid into crystal glasses. "Cognac?" he offered, holding one out to me. I accepted it, more for something to do with my hands than any desire to drink. "Your home is beautiful." "It's just a house," he replied, gesturing for me to sit in one of the leather chairs positioned near the unlit fireplace. "Secure, private, but empty most of the time. You don't live here?" "I have an apartment in the city for day-to-day use. This place is more of a retreat." He took the chair opposite mine, studying me over the rim of his glass. "Is Zoe settled?" "Yes, she went down easily. Excitement of the day, I think." He nodded, then set his glass aside, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "You wanted the truth, Eleanor. What specifically do you want to know?" I took a sip of the cognac, letting the warmth spread through me before asking, "Who are you, really, beyond the business owner, the landlord?" "Officially, I'm the CEO of Volkov Enterprises. Import, export, real estate, entertainment venues." His face remained impassive. "Unofficially, I manage what you would call organized crime operations across several states." The bluntness of his admission still managed to shock me, despite my suspicions. "So you're... what? A mob boss?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "That term has certain theatrical connotations, but essentially, yes. I control territories, businesses, and people. I enforce rules that exist outside conventional law. I protect what's mine." "And the Velvet Slipper? That's one of your businesses?" "One of many. A legitimate enterprise on paper, useful for other purposes in practice. Like money laundering," I guessed. He inclined his head slightly. "Among other things." "And the apartment building? Is that just another front?" "No." His answer came quickly, definitively. "The building is a legitimate investment, clean, as are several of my other properties." I took another sip of the cognac, needing its burn. "So the job you offered me, was that real? Or was it just a way to, I don't know, keep an eye on me?" "The job is real, Eleanor. The building needed a manager. You needed stability." His eyes held mine. "But yes, I could have hired anyone. I chose you. Why?" "The truth." He was quiet for a moment, as if measuring his words. "When I saw you that night at the club, I recognized something rare. A woman with nothing, fighting for everything. It awakened something in me I thought long dead." "Pity?" I suggested, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "No," he answered sharply. "Admiration, desire, a recognition. The directness of his response made heat rise to my face. Desire, I repeated. So this was about getting me into your bed. If that were my only goal, there are simpler paths I could have taken. His expression hardened slightly. I don't use coercion or dependency to gain consent, Eleanor. Ever. I believed him, which was perhaps the most surprising realization of the evening. For all his danger, all his darkness, there were lines Alexander Volkov would not cross. The fire at my old building, I said, changing direction. You believe Tony was responsible? Not directly. He lacks the courage. But he hired someone. His jaw tightened. The men he was seen speaking with have connections to a rival organization. They likely saw an opportunity to strike at me through you. The casual way he discussed attempted murder sent a chill through me. And what happens to them? To Tony? Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Justice will be served. Your kind of justice, I said. Not the legal kind. My justice is more reliable. More final. He watched me carefully. Does that disturb you? I considered the question honestly. It should. But when I think about what could have happened to Zoe if we'd been in that apartment... I didn't finish the sentence, the horror of the possibility closing my throat. Alexander leaned forward, taking my free hand in his. I would burn this city to ash before letting harm come to either of you. The fierce protectiveness in his voice, in his touch, ignited something in me I'd suppressed for too long. A hunger for connection, for passion, for feeling something beyond exhaustion and fear. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. After you've dealt with Tony and his associates? That depends entirely on what you want. His thumb traced circles on my palm. You could return to managing the building. I would ensure additional security, of course. Or... He hesitated. Or, I prompted. Or you could stay here, with me. His eyes, usually so controlled, revealed a vulnerability I hadn't seen before. Not as an employee or a protected asset, but as my partner. My breath caught. Your partner in what way? In every way, he answered simply. I want you by my side, Eleanor, you and Zoe. As your... what? Girlfriend? Mistress? As my wife, he stated, the words hanging in the air between us. If that's what you want. I pulled my hand away, standing abruptly. The proposal, if that's what it was, felt too sudden, too overwhelming. You barely know me. I know enough, he countered, rising to face me. I know your strength, your loyalty, your fierce heart. The rest we would discover together. And your world, the danger, the violence. You expect me to bring my daughter into that? I expect you to allow me to protect both of you, with every resource at my disposal. He stepped closer, his presence enveloping me. I won't pretend there aren't risks. But there are risks in poverty too, in vulnerability. At least with me, you would never face them alone again. The truth of his words struck deep. I had spent so long fighting alone, carrying the weight of Zoe's future on my shoulders, that the prospect of sharing that burden was both terrifying and tempting beyond measure. I need time, I whispered. This is a lot to process. Of course, he agreed, though I could sense his restraint, the effort it took for him not to press further. Take all the time you need. You're safe here regardless of your decision. We stood in silence for a moment, the air between us charged with possibility, with unspoken desires. May I show you something? He asked suddenly. Curious despite my emotional turmoil, I nodded. He took my hand again, leading me through the house to a room I hadn't seen before, a small library with walls of books and a single photograph prominently displayed on the desk. It showed a beautiful woman with dark hair and striking eyes, holding a young boy who couldn't have been more than 5 or 6. Both were smiling, though there was a weariness around the woman's eyes that spoke of hardship. Your mother, I guessed. Yes, Alexander confirmed, his voice softened by memory, the last photo taken before things became difficult. I studied the image, seeing the echoes of the boy and the man beside me. You have her eyes, and her stubbornness, according to my father. A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. She would have liked you, I think. She valued courage above all else. The intimacy of him sharing this piece of his past wasn't lost on me. This was Alexander offering not just protection or passion, but himself. His history. His wounds. His heart. When I lost her, he continued quietly, I lost the only person who saw me as more than just the son of a powerful man, who believed I could be better than the world I was born into. His eyes met mine. Until I saw you, dancing for your daughter's future, I never thought I'd find that kind of love again. His honesty stripped me bare, leaving nowhere to hide from my own feelings. The attraction I'd felt from the beginning had deepened into something more complex, more frightening in its intensity. I should get some rest, I said, overwhelmed by the emotions coursing through me. He nodded, accepting my retreat without challenge. Of course. Good night, Eleanor. As I turned to leave, some impulse made me stop at the doorway and look back at him, this dangerous, complicated man who had upended my world so completely. Alexander, I said softly, thank you for saving us, for seeing me. Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a hope. Always, he promised. 3 days passed in a strange domesticity. Alexander worked from his home office, but made time to join us for meals, to sit with Zoe in the gardens, to show me the grounds of the estate. Never pushing, never demanding, but always present, always watching me with that intensity that made my skin tingle. On the 4th morning, I woke to find Marta waiting with coffee and news. Mr. Volkov asked me to inform you that the situation has been resolved, she said, her tone matter-of-fact despite what I suspected resolved meant in this context. You are free to return to the apartment when you wish. He has arranged for additional security measures to be installed. Freedom to choose, just as he'd promised. The question was, what did I actually want? I spent the day turning the question over in my mind as I watched Zoe play in the sunroom, as I walked the gardens, as I stood looking out over the city that seemed so distant from this hillside sanctuary. That evening, after putting Zoe to bed, I found Alexander in the same study where we'd had our conversation days before. He looked up from his desk when I entered, setting aside whatever document he'd been reviewing. Marta said you wanted to see me, he said, his tone careful, neutral. Yes. I moved further into the room, gathering my courage. She told me this morning that everything's been handled, that we can go back to the apartment. He nodded. The threat has been eliminated. The building is secure. I didn't ask for details. Some things were better left unknown. Thank you. You don't need to thank me for keeping you safe, Eleanor. That will always be my priority, regardless of anything else. The unspoken question hung between us. Would I stay, or would I go? Would I accept all of him, darkness included, or retreat to the safer distance of employee and employer? I took a deep breath. These past few days, watching you with Zoe, seeing how you've created this safe place for us, I've been thinking about what you said, about being your partner. His expression remained carefully controlled, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the hope he was trying to suppress, and I can't pretend to understand your world completely, I began, or to approve of everything in it, but I understand enough to know that you are more than what others see, more than the power, the danger. I stepped closer, close enough to catch the scent of his cologne, to see the subtle shift in his breathing as I approached. I've spent so long fighting alone, I continued, telling myself that depending on anyone was too risky, that the only person I could trust was myself. But watching you with my daughter, seeing how you protected us without demanding anything in return, it showed me something I didn't expect. What? He asked, his voice rougher than usual. That sometimes the strongest choice isn't standing alone. Sometimes it's recognizing when someone is offering not a cage but a fortress. I reached out, my fingers lightly touching his face. I want to stay, Alexander, with you, not because I need your protection or your money, but because I want the man beneath all that. The man who prepared a perfect nursery for a child he barely knew. The man who looks at me and actually sees me. The control he always maintained slipped then, his hands coming to my waist, drawing me closer. Are you certain? he asked, searching my eyes for any doubt. Once you choose this, choose me, there's no going back. My world doesn't allow for half measures. I don't want half measures, I assured him. I want all of you, the good and the dangerous, the man and the power he wields. His hands tightened on my waist. And Zoe? Needs a father who will move heaven and earth to keep her safe, I said simply. Who better than you? Something broke open in his expression then. Relief, joy, desire all mingling together as he pulled me fully against him, one hand tangling in my hair as his lips finally found mine. The kiss was everything I'd imagined and nothing like I'd expected. Tender and fierce at once, controlled yet desperate. I melted into him, my arms wrapping around his neck as years of loneliness and struggle dissolved in the heat building between us. When we broke apart, both breathing heavily, he pressed his forehead to mine. I will give you the world, Eleanor. Everything I have, everything I am, is yours. I don't need the world, I whispered against his lips. Just you. Just this family we're building. His smile, the first full, genuine smile I'd seen from him, transformed his face, revealing the man who might have existed in another life, one untouched by violence and loss. Then that's what you'll have, he promised. A family. A home. A life where you never have to dance for survival again. Later that night, as we lay tangled together in his bed, his arms holding me with a tenderness that belied their strength, I thought about the strange path that had led me here. From a desperate dancer in a seedy club, to the chosen partner of one of the most dangerous, most powerful men in the city. Life had taught me that nothing came without a price. But as Alexander slept beside me, as I thought of Zoe safe in her nursery down the hall, I realized that sometimes the price was worth paying. Sometimes the darkest beginnings led to the brightest futures. I had started dancing to give my daughter the necessities of life: formula, medicine, shelter. But in that smoky club, under the unforgiving lights, I had found something far more precious, a man who saw beyond my circumstances to the woman beneath. A man who offered not just security, but love. Not just protection, but partnership. A man who would burn the world to keep us safe, but who looked at me as though I had already saved him. As I drifted toward sleep in his arms, I knew our story was just beginning. There would be challenges ahead, adjusting to his world, navigating the dangers inherent in his position, building a life together that balanced darkness and light. But for the first time since becoming a mother, I didn't face the future alone. I had found my fortress, my protector, my partner. And though the path that brought me to him was paved with desperation and sacrifice, I wouldn't change a single step of the dance that led me home.